GQ patrols have been modified endlessly, and it's hard to come up with a modification that's new, but I bet you haven't seen this one before. In the last episode on this ute, I finished it off with just bending up this roof slider and joining it into the tray. And now I have bent up the driver side one as well. All the crush tubes are welded in, the camber joint is in, and it's joined into the tray as well. I filmed some clips of this process, so I'll throw them in now. If you missed the last episode on the ute, I've had 5 slugs machined up per side. So there's 2 slugs welded into the pillar, and then we replaced the roof and 3 slugs got welded in behind the roof. So it's all done properly and it'll be super strong, and that allows me to bolt this whole roof slider on, which is going to turn into a whole roof cage thing in this episode. Now that the roof sliders are done, I can get into this roof cage system. So pretty much I want to run some bars from one side to the other with a cross in the middle. I've got a light bar to mount on the front with a guard on it, a rear light bar mount to mount on the rear hoop as well. And the basic idea of doing all this is pretty much if the car was ever in a rollover, this should protect me quite well. And maybe not a massive rollover, but if it did go on its roof, this whole roof cage system should hopefully keep the cab straight. Because if you ever rolled it and it bent the pillars, pushed the roof in and that, like the cab's done, so then I'd have to build another cab. Hopefully this car is never in a rollover, but you do have to be prepared sometimes. Also up the back here, I've got to do some chassis bracing, the light bar mount up here as well. So there's a whole heap to do this episode. The car should start looking pretty cool by the end of it. So the first bar I'm going to do is one directly across the roof. Now I did have this idea. I was going to buy a tube roller and I was going to radius the tube to the front of the windscreen, just sort of above it. But because I'm using 1.5-inch roll cage tube, I still would have had to put a bend at either end because the roof sliders are hard on the cab. Otherwise I couldn't actually get this crossbar to intersect the roof slider. So it would have been a bit tricky to have a radius bit of tube with a bend at the end and trying to get it to all line up. So I sort of snatched that idea. And we'll just run some straight bars sort of in line with the rear hoop just to try and make it all look symmetrical. And then they'll just have a slight bend at either end, to drop onto the roof slider. Once this bar's on, I'll mount the light bar to this, and then I'll build a guard over the top of the light bar, and then we'll continue on with the rest of the roof. Let's do some bending. Well, most of the tube work is now done on the roof here. It come up actually really good. Initially I was gonna put a cross in it and then a center bar, but I just didn't have enough 1.5 inch tube for that. I had leftovers from 8 years ago and I managed to scrounge up a few scrap lengths, and that's pretty much all of it gone. So I've only got probably like 100 mil off cut and that's it. But that design on the top was actually the original idea before I decided I was going to put a cross in it. So that should be plenty strong enough. Hopefully I never actually have to use it. I actually think the straight bar across the top of the windscreen looks good. Like my original idea, like I said, was to radius the bit of tube to the top of the windscreen. But then doing this design in the roof would look pretty funny. So squaring that up allowed me to square the roof up, and then it all lines in with the rear hoop and everything. So it all looks nice. So another thing I was going to do just to finish the whole roof off was to put like a plate brace in that I can cut out on the plasma table. So something that just joins all these 4 bits of tube together into this back tube. No real reason other than like for looks. Like tying that all together helps with strength, but I just think it'll look cool, you know, have some sort of design at the back here to tie it all in. And I've got the plasma table, so why not use it? So the next job I want to tackle is the light bar mount on the front, and then we'll get on to the rear one. So STEDI have been nice enough to sort out the lights for this car, which is absolutely awesome. They're pretty similar to what I did on my wagon last year with a few slight changes. So I thought we'd just quickly go through what I've got here and where it's all going to situate on the car. So this big one down the front is a 42-inch ST 4K light bar. Now I've got the exact same one on the roof of my wagon and I was very impressed with it, which is why I've opted to do the same on this car. Now this is the one we'll be mounting. That'll go across the top of the windscreen there. They do supply hardware and everything to mount it, but I'm going to do my own mounts up just because I want it to wrap around the tube and they're going to be welded on, just to make it a bit easier for me. This is a 26-inch micro V2. It's like a work light floodlight thing. So this is going to go on the back facing rearward, and this would be like the reverse light or whatever, up nice and high, and nice big flood beam so I can see what's going on behind me. I haven't used one of these yet, so I'm excited to see how these go. We've got a 21.5-inch ST 3K, so this is the same one that's on the bull bar of my wagon. Up until like yesterday, I always planned to put this one on the bull bar as well, but because this light bar is so far forward, I'm not sure it's worth putting this one on the bull bar, because usually I have the roof bar back a little bit and the roof casts a shadow, so you end up with like a shadow in front of the car from the roof light bar. So then I'll put one on the bull bar just to pick up the immediate area in front of the bar. So I'm not sure yet whether this one will go on the bull bar or whether I'll use it for something else. We have 2 C4 work lights. Now, once again, because the roof light bar is so far forward, I'm going to put these at the back of the cab facing sort of sideways, just so I can get a nice light out each side of the car, because that's one thing that sort of annoys me when you're driving at night, especially in tight tracks. You know, you look out your window and if your light's too far forward on your roof, or if you don't have a roof one, you can't actually see like directly next to you. So they should light it up nicely. So these are little 10-watt flush mount LEDs. So I plan on putting these in the tailboard just to have some immediate light right at the back of the car, because sometimes depending on how much camping gear is loaded on the back, you know, it's fully loaded, the light bar up high might be a bit obstructed. So these will just be in the tailboard as a reverse light as well. I'll probably have all the rear lights on a 3-way switch so I can flick them on manually or with reverse. Sometimes it's nice just to have a big floodlight in a situation, whether it's around camp or whether you need to see something on the tracks. So they should come in handy. These are the carbon headlights. So in the wagon, I have the homage ones, the other style, and I thought I'll just try the carbon ones in this car and just see how they compare. I haven't used these before, so I am keen to see how they go. And the last of the bits is just little miscellaneous parts. So we've got some LED bulbs to convert like your indicators or brake lights or reverse lights or whatever to LEDs. I did put these in my wagon. I was actually very surprised, you know, when you put it in reverse, how much more light they throw out. So That's a not bad little mod. And I think I've got them in the Parkers at the front as well, which they made a good difference. A T1500 work light. So I actually already have one of these as well, and I'm very happy with it. Magnetic base, and it swivels as well. So it's handy, like I've had it above the workbench or under the car, or I take it camping. So it'd be nice to have one full time in the car. We've got an FX 4800 torch. Now I've already been playing with this, so it's flat, but this is actually very impressive as well. I plan on making some sort of holder for it in the car, whether it's behind the seat or something. You can just slip it in. Quite often I find myself wanting a torch, you know, when I'm camping or four-wheel driving in the dark. You just want to jump out and have a nice bright torch. And other than a headlight or whatever, I don't have one, so that will come in handy. And then just the little FX 1000 like pocket torch to keep in the cup holder or the center console. Again, that's flat because I've been playing with it, but packs a fair bit of punch for a little torch. So huge thanks to STEDI. The car's gonna look awesome, lit up like a Christmas tree, but it's about time I mounted this light bar. So I'm gonna draw something up on the computer, we'll cut it on the table, and then we'll slip it up there, weld it on and mount the bar. All right, well, I've just smashed out a heap of jobs. So the 42-inch light bar is now fully mounted. Now, I was just gonna mount it and then show you guys and then proceed to do the top hoop over it for protection and whatever, but I just got carried away and mounted it, and I had some ideas and I just got in the groove and made it happen. So you might have seen in the clips, I did run this bar further down this roof slider section. I had it about 100 mil lower, and I sort of eyed it square to this bar that goes across the top of the windscreen. And I actually, I finished it all up, and then I went to bed and I slept on it, and I woke up in the morning and I didn't really like how it looked, you know, mounted so far down the pillar. But it was easy enough to change because I had them plasma cut brackets on top, which I've just added in for strength mainly, or a bit of looks, I guess. So that just joins the roof cage tube to this light bar tube. I was gonna make them out of tube as well, but the radius isn't tight enough, and you know, I couldn't make it all work around the light bar, like the tube would have fouled on it. So I just cut them out of 6mm plate. but that allowed me just to trim this tube up, rotate it and weld it back in place. So it kept it all level, like it was actually quite easy. And I needed more room for a snorkel. So having this bar like 100 mil lower essentially chewed into where the snorkel can actually run. But it looks a lot better like this. It's all tied into one sort of junction, and it should make this corner of the roof cage quite strong. So if it was ever to tip over or had a load come down on the A-pillar up here, it should be pretty structurally sound for the most part. So I did have an idea to join the bottom of these with a tube over the scuttle panel here or the bottom of the windscreen, but it makes the snorkel really hard to do. So if you have a tube here, and you have a snorkel come out the bonnet or even up the guard here, it's got to somehow go around that tube, and it either looks bad or, it's just not worth the headache of putting that bottom bar in. So as you would have seen, I also mounted the rear facing light bar. So I got halfway of drawing just a single tab that I was just going to weld to one bit of tube. And I thought it would be an awesome idea to make the tab go between the two bits of tube. And not that it's very visible, but it looks bloody awesome. Kind of looks like a Batman symbol, but little pieces like that just add to the overall quality of the build. Just taking an extra 5 minutes to do a cool looking bracket like that, it just sort of shows that there's been a little bit more effort put into it. I've also gone ahead and just added these webbing pieces in that I was talking about. I think it looks brilliant, and obviously that's going to add a lot of strength to this area, but again, it just shows, there's a bit more effort put in. It took about half an hour to do this, so no big deal. And I've got the plasma table sitting there, so why not use it? So one thing I've really been racking my brain about is where to mount these little C4 work lights from STEDI. Now, like I mentioned earlier, these are just going to be like a side light. It's probably hard to see from that camera angle, but I was planning on putting them somewhere, halfway along the roof. But if you look from the front, they stick out, and I sort of don't want these or any light to be sort of vulnerable. I want them to be like protected. And in order to get them protected, they have to be mounted too far in. And I think that would create too much of a shadow from the side of the roof. You wouldn't get light until 5-10 meters out from the side of the car, where I sort of want light next to the car. Now that's obviously hard to do without putting a light in a vulnerable spot. I had an idea of maybe going behind the rear hoop and between the cab, but it's too close. If you have any movement, it'll hit the light, and then the tube in the cab will create too much of a shadow anyway. So I'm not too sure what I'm doing at this stage. I might have to get some more of them rear lights, but some shorter ones, and just mount them directly to the roof slider, but set them back a little bit. At least they will be lower than this front bit of tube here, so it sort of is protected from any oncoming branches or anything like that. But that'll be something I'll solve in a future episode. It's not a big deal right now. The next job on the cards is infill pieces for these twin tubes here. It's quite a common thing when people do this. They infill it with a bit of plate, and I'm going to do the same. Now, I did have the idea to vertically mount the light bar on the infill plate, but I didn't want it facing up at the sky. I wanted it facing down, and if I put it down here, it's too low. Like, that'll probably get smashed. So I'll draw up a plate. We're going to go from this crossbar to this crossbar, and then another piece to that crossbar. We're going to put some holes down it and dimple dime, and that should look pretty flash. How many times can I film the plasma table and make it look different? I'll just show you at the end. All right, so our bits of plate are cut. We've got the long one for the upper section and then the shorter one for the lower section. So we'll jump over to the press and I'll show you how to dimple die. So for all these round holes, I'm gonna dimple die them, which is just a little die like this. It just radiuses the hole. It adds a little bit more strength to the plate, and I don't know, looks cool. So there's two pieces, the male and the female. The male like that. We'll put a bit of oil on the plate. We'll drop the plate on the male, slip that over. And then we press until it's fully flat again. I've roughly gauged it to 15 ton on the gauge, so I'll just pump 15 ton, pull it out. We have a nice dimple dyed hole. You can see the difference, radiused in, not radius. It looks a lot better. And like, this is 3mm, like this is as thick as you can do with the dies, but if this was 1.6 or thinner, and you put a dimple die in that, if you radius the hole, it adds a lot more strength to the plate, so it's not as flexible. But again, looks cool. And here are the plates, all dimple dyed and ready to go, if you can see that. So we'll jump over there, we'll tack these on for now. I'm not gonna fully weld anything because I haven't fully welded much of that at all. I'll do that at a later date. We'll go chuck these on and see how it looks. All right, well that is looking awesome. So if you've done any of this work before or seen any of it, it's funny how much better, you know, a bit of plate with holes cut into it looks when you've dimple dyed the holes. Like, it just makes everything look better. But they come up good, happy with that. I'm sort of not sure if, you know, I should continue it. I don't really want to continue it because it's like, where do you stop? And then I end up doing the whole lot. And that's probably a little bit unnecessary. But at the same time, it probably would look cool with the whole lot done. So I don't know, I'll leave it at that for now and I'll sleep on it and go from there. So last thing on the jobs list for this video is going to be chassis bracing. So I've actually drawn up half of it already and cut it out. So this is it here. So this piece goes on the inside of the chassis rail and it goes from the cross member where the back of your transfer case ends up to the cross member where your upper control arms mount to. So this area is probably the most common to crack. They've got a joint in the chassis that always cracks, and it actually is cracked on this one slightly, so I've got to weld it up before these go on. But I've done this out of 4mm plate, so it's nice and strong. So along with this and the bushes in the top, it should make it, you know, quite a bit stiffer between the cab and the tray. Whether that's a good thing or not, that's open to opinions, but that's what I'm trying to achieve, and this should stop any future cracking as well. So the next bit of bracing I've got to draw up is on the outside of the chassis over the rear diff. So I'm going to make it go from like the second tray mount over the rear diff to pretty much this third tray mount area, or this cross member where the fuel tank bolts to. And on the other side, it'll just stop at the panhard mount because that comes on the outside of the chassis. The reason I want to brace this area is pretty much the bump stop. So if you have a real hard hit on the bump stop, you can dent the chassis in, and I have seen this before. I've had some pretty hard slams on the bump stops in the race car, and it hasn't happened to that. So it would take some serious force, but while I'm here and drawing up bracing and getting everything ready, why not just do it? It won't take me long to do. So I've got this bit of angle on here to pretty much reference my drawing off. So I've got like a square top to measure down from, and I'll be able to reference that on the program. So I'm still only using a very basic CAD program. I've done a couple things in Fusion, but it's still not as streamlined as this basic program. And for all my 2D stuff, that's pretty much all I need, just a basic drawing program. So having this straight top edge should be able to accurately measure the radius of everything and where the cross member holes are and bits like that. Pretty much I'm just going to measure and draw and then cut, and I'll check back in because how many times do I have to show you the process in one video before it gets super boring? So let's see how it goes. So I've just gone through and wire wheeled the factory paint off and then treated it all with weld through copper primer. I've done the inside piece as well as the outside piece on the passenger side. So this is the inside bit of chassis bracing. It stops just above the cross member there behind the gearbox and then stops against the cross member at the upper control arms. I've also added some slits going on an angle through the middle just to keep the middle of the plate hard up against the chassis. So I've done something a little different and added these checkouts all the way around the outside. So these are so you can stitch it on. So the low point is where you'd weld and then the raised point is where you don't need to weld. So that's every 50 mil. So 50 mil weld, 50 mil break. And then it's stepped in one, so you don't have to go around and mark it, but two, so you're not welding too close to the radius of the chassis because some engineers don't like that. But that fits good. And this is a rear section as well that sits on here. Same thing with the checkouts around the outside, should make it nice and easy to weld and pretty quick. I've treated the back side of these with copper primer as well, so it should have a little bit of rust protection behind it. I'm currently in the process of starting up a website that's been going on for a while, but yeah, hopefully that's up and running soon. So any of this stuff that I've cut on the table is all available, all this chassis bracing and mounts and everything like that, and the things I do in the future as well. So keep an eye out for that. And that's one side chassis bracing done, the inside and out. I'll clean it up a little bit more. I'll die grind the holes out just to make it look all nice, and then I'll give it a coat of paint. But that feels nice and solid. I should not have any dramas with chassis cracking at all. Well, that wraps up this episode. We've got a heap done and I've got a heap more to do. Pretty much the next job on the cards is this front end. So I've got to get this front diff sorted, and then we'll be doing like shock mounts and panhard and all. There's a lot of stuff to do at the front, so that will be the next hurdle. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like while you're here, share it around with your mates, and let me know what you think in the comments. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'm excited for the next one to do this front end. So stay tuned and I'll catch you in a fortnight.